For once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I've needed so long. For once unafraid, I can go where life leads me. Somehow I know I'll be strong. For once I can...
Hey guys, so in this video I want to do an analysis of James Jameson's bass line on For Once in My Life. We'll keep it fun, we'll keep it fresh, we're not going to go too in-depth, but I just want to show you some of this devices he's using, whether it be like arpeggios, scales, approach notes, like being informed from walking bass lines and how he approaches chords, and hopefully it'll give you a better idea of how to use it in your own playing and sort of what to do when you're constructing lines. Take it all with a pinch of salt, it's my opinion based on like my knowledge of music theory, my knowledge of bass playing, but do your own research, have an experiment, have a go yourself, see what you come up with, have a play of it. So we're going to start. You can see I'm running the iPad here just so I can sort of annotate and go along with it and show you some devices, circle things. It's probably going to be a bit messy as I draw it, but you know, at least it'll give you an idea. So we're going to dive right into it, and we're going to start with the chords. So we're literally after the lead in, we know we got these like 5 bars of rest. After this little lead in, we're going to start with the first 2 bars, the first 4 chords. We're going to look at what chords are being played by Stevie Wonder and how Jameson approaches them. Okay, so your first chord is just an F major. So we got F, A, C. Okay, then we get this F plus chord. Now if you're not familiar with that, that just means an F sharp 5 or an F augmented. So instead of F, A, C, we get F, A, C sharp. So the first 2 chords are F major, F augmented. Then we get this F6, which is just an F major with your natural 6 added on top. So if we think of the F major scale, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F. And if we count that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we get a D natural. So we're just going to play F, A, C with a D natural on top. It's going to sound like this. Okay. Really cool. Sounds a bit like a U chord. Okay, so first 3 chords in the first 2 bars, we got F major, F sharp 5, F augmented, F6. Okay, then this really cool chord. Now, this is a bit of controversy. This is what I want to talk about to first start off. So you'll see sometimes it's notated as F fully diminished, F sharp fully diminished, excuse me. So what we get is this, we get F sharp, A, C, E flat. Okay, now you'll also see it sometimes notated as D7 flat 9. Now, it's basically the same chord, especially functional harmony wise, and we'll talk about that when we get into Jameson's bass line. But F sharp fully diminished, we get F sharp, A, C, E flat, like we mentioned. D7 flat 9, we get D, F sharp, A, C, E flat. Okay, so you can see that they share so many of the same notes. It's just that our F sharp fully diminished wouldn't have that D in it. But we'll talk about that now. So let's talk about Jameson's approach, okay? So when Jameson comes in, like you heard me play the line before, and I only put my line up, by the way, for copyright. Like, I'm not saying, like, obviously Jameson plays it a million times better than me. Like, I'm just imitating him. Put it up at the beginning just to dip copyright so that I'm not using the original track and all that good stuff. So Jameson does some really interesting things when he approaches this, and obviously, like, he's a bit of a masterclass in, like, bassline building in terms of, like, bouncing around, describing the harmony nicely in the weight. So if we look at this very, very first bar, so he's playing over an F major, like we've talked about. Then he's playing over an F augmented. Now, something really cool that he does, he starts off with just root notes, so he plays, okay, over this F major, so we get. Then over the F augmented, he stays on the root, okay. But he puts a major 3rd in, then he puts the 6th in, then the major 3rd again. Okay, so what we get over this F augmented, is we get then, okay, so there's your 6th, then we get 3rd, then he plays this C, okay, which is super interesting. So we know in that chord, F, A, C sharp, we've got a C sharp, but he's playing a C natural, but it works perfectly, okay, so you almost use it so quickly as a semiquaver that it's hardly noticeable in terms of like clashing against the chord. Okay, so then over this F6, he does another thing. I mean, I'm going to say this every time, but he does something else that's really interesting. So then when he plays over this F6, we know it's F, A, C, D. Okay, now Jameson's line's really interesting. So he starts on this F, Then he plays an E flat. Then he plays a C sharp. Okay, so that's all over this F6. So if we hear that, F6, then we get F, E flat, C sharp as a passing note. And then we'll talk about what happens next. But what's really cool about that, and they're really quick, and when you will have heard them with the record or with the line that I played first, they're really fast, so they don't really like inform the harmony, which is like something I wanted to touch on as well. When you play really fast notes, we can call them like passing notes, you know, they're almost like so fast that they just give you a sense of movement or a feeling of movement, and they're not actually describing the chord. You know, if you played that C sharp over an F6 and just held it right there, you know, it's a bit crunchy. You know, when you play, you know, it sort of becomes like this passing approach thing. And this is what I want to talk about now. Okay, so in this, he does two things that are really interesting. So over this F6, he sort of plays around the sixth, but everything but the sixth. So if you think of it, F, A, C, D, this D there is our sixth. Now Jameson plays an E flat after the F and then a C sharp. Okay, so he's playing a semitone either side of this six, and this is going to create tension because, like, you know, sort of like psychologically, all your ear wants is to hear this sixth, this addition. But Jameson is almost saying, okay, here's an E flat, here's a C sharp. So he's playing around that, which is really interesting. Now the C sharp, let's give the C sharp some context. So the note Jameson plays after that C sharp is a D natural. And then he plays an arpeggio. He plays D, A, F sharp, A, like an upside down arpeggio. Okay, so that's like a D major style arpeggio. So if we listen to the line from the F6, and don't forget, this last part's going to be over this crunchy chord, we're going to call it. It's going to be over this F sharp diminished or D7 flat 9, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about why it can be both of them things. Okay, so we get this F6, then we get this line we talked about, then we get... Okay, so over that F sharp diminished or D7 flat 9, he plays a upside down arpeggio. So he plays like D, A, F sharp, A. Okay, now this is where this sort of like bit of controversy comes into it. So most transcriptions, and we're just here, I circle it, most transcriptions will call this a D7 flat 9, but some of the official transcriptions call it an F sharp fully diminished. Okay, now we'll talk about why there's a bit of a difference. So we know they share from before, we know that they share loads of similarities in terms of F sharp fully diminished, F sharp, A, C, E flat, and then D7 flat 9, we get D, F sharp, A, C, E flat. Okay, now the reason people call it different things is because this is functional harmony. So the whole purpose of this chord is to get you to the chord that's after it. So the chord that is after this is a G minor 7, okay? So this chord, we can almost think of it as like a passing chord, or functionally, it is used to get from this F to the G minor 7. So let's hear what that sounds like. We're gonna go from F6, we're gonna go to F sharp, fully diminished, or D7 flat 9, and then we're gonna go to G minor. Okay, so if we have F6, then if we have F sharp, fully diminished, then we get this G minor. Okay, so you see that it leads in perfectly. It's almost got like a feeling of like a dominant function. Okay, and this is what I want to talk about now. Now, this is all my own opinion, but from seeing what Jameson plays, Jameson sees it and hears it, and whether he had a chord chart or not, Jameson sees it and hears it as a D7 flat 9, okay? Now, where they got this chord from, a bit of a background, is they've got this, it's a borrowed chord from G harmonic minor. So they're going into G minor. Okay, so D7 flat 9 is the 5th chord in G harmonic minor, and that's going to take us right back to the root really nicely. So this is a really clever bit of harmony from Stevie Wonder, which you can say about every one of his songs. Crazy, okay, his harmony's unbelievable. So you could say this about every single one of his songs, but this is really clever. He's used a borrowed chord, from G harmonic minor, which is dead cool. Now, D7 flat 9, 5th chord, and then we get F sharp fully diminished as the 7th chord in G harmonic minor. Okay, now it's my opinion, looking at what Jameson plays when he plays this upside down arpeggio, this D, A, F sharp, A, that he sees it as a D7 flat 9. Okay, so even though the voicing in the right hand of the piano is this F sharp half diminished, Jameson by sort of controlling the bottom end and playing D, A, F sharp, A, is sort of screaming out to you saying, I'm seeing this as a D7 flat 9, I'm seeing this as a 5 to 1, like a dominant functioning chord, okay, which is super, super interesting. It's really cool that you can denote that just from sort of what he plays and how he approached it. Now, he does change his approach, so we'll talk about that a bit later, about what he does. And I won't make this video too long, guys. I just want to give you a taste of, like, one, how I teach things, and, you know, two, like, how you can do this yourself and really break a line down. Okay, so in the next bar, we get G minor. So we got this G minor. Remember, we've used this F sharp fully diminished or D7 flat 9 to get to G minor. Okay, and then after that, we get this D plus again, which is D augmented or D sharp 5, which is, okay, which is a really cool sound. Okay, that's ace. So what Jameson does here is he goes into sort of like classic Jameson, like jazz mode. So we all know he's like an amazing walking bass player, he's a proper jazzer. And in my opinion, Jameson's whole approach is to do with weight, using big bottom notes to weight things down, and it's also to do with smoothing out lines. Now, one way he does this is to use chromatic approach notes. So the way he approaches this G minor here, so we get this G minor, Jameson plays G, and then he plays B flat to C. Okay, so we know G to B flat, they're the first two notes out of our G minor arpeggio. So G minor arpeggio, we get G, B flat, D. Okay, so Jameson plays G, then he plays B flat C. That C is going to give you a bit of tension because that's the sus4 in the G minor. Then he plays a C sharp because that C sharp is his chromatic approach note that leads us into this D augmented. Okay, which is super interesting. So what we get is this. Then we get, okay, which is really cool. So he's using like a bit of sort of jazzology, if you like, a bit of like walk and bass to smooth the line out and lead or voice lead your ear into different chords, okay? Because that change, although it's only like one note different, because the chord's a bit fruity, a sharp 5 chord quite exotic that it changes to, it can feel a bit blocky if it changes, but little tiny things like this, little details like using these chromatic approach notes, these can smooth things out. Okay, and like, I know we're reading into this and I'm not saying Jameson thought exactly, oh, I'm going to play this sus4, I'm going to play this C over G minor, but by playing that C in the G minor, it sort of unsettles you anyway. You know, it's not a chord tone, it's a tension tone, you know, like we talked about. So it's G, B flat, D, that G minor arpeggio. He played G, and then passing note B flat, then he played that C, which is the sus4, but the chord doesn't change. Then he played that C sharp to D augmented. Okay, so already like it's not the most stable line, it's almost like he's preparing you for this change. So then when we get into the D augmented line here, he just does something really simple. So he hangs on the root note, so we get that rhythm that he loves, like that dotted quaver to semi-quaver tied. And then he does another passing note, okay? So he does F natural, which is a minor third. Now we know an augmented chord or a sharp 5 chord is a type of major chord. It's got a major third, so here's your major third. You can hear them against each other, like a minor 6 feel, and then get the sharp 5. So Jameson plays a minor third over it, but then he plays the major third too as a passing note, because that chromatically leads us into G minor where the chord goes again. So F, F sharp, G minor. So you get this. Okay, which is dead cool. So then when we get back into G minor, we get exactly the same chord progression again. We get G minor to D plus or D augmented. Okay, and he does something similar to the way he approached the D augmented before that now, okay? So we get this rhythm again. So we get that dotted quaver to tied semi-quaver, and then he just does a chromatic rundown. So if you see it here on the music, he just plays that G twice, and then we get F, E, E flat. Okay, so what it sounds like is, okay, which is really cool. Now if we think about G minor, he's playing the root, then he's playing the minor 7, then he's playing a major 6. So we slow it down, minor 7, really cool sound. Okay, that's your major 6. Then we get this like minor 6. Okay, now it's a super quick passing note and it's a semi-quaver, but this is like a really bit of nerdy music theory. But if you see what that turns the chord into, E flat, G, B flat, D, it's like an E flat major 7, you know, which is cool. That's just like a bit of a side note. And then he does this arpeggio thing again, like he done over the F sharp fully diminished or the D7 flat 9, but this time he does it over this D augmented. So we get this G, then we get, okay, then we get into this D augmented again, where he plays D, A, F sharp. Okay, so D, D, A, F sharp, this like upside down arpeggio again. Now, F sharp is the last note of that arpeggio, and it is in the arpeggio, but he also doubles it up as a leading note. Okay, sort of a chromatic note going into the next chord, which is G minor again. Okay, which is dead cool, and he's almost like highlighting here like a 5-to-1 thing, because if you think about it, D to G, like if you think about G major scale, G, A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your 5 is D, and we know it's usually dominant. Going back to G major, 5-to-1. So Jameson's sort of almost like playing with that idea, being like, hey, look, this is a type of major chord with an F sharp in it, and it's going to resolve back to 1. Obviously, we're in the key of F major. Probably should have said that at the beginning. But we're in the key of F major, so we're talking now like out the key of F major. We're just talking like chordally, like how he's making relationships between the chords. But he's saying like, yeah, okay, so I'm going to see this D augmented, and I'm going to play, and then into... So that F sharp then resolves into this G minor, which is ace. Okay, so super quickly, because I really want to touch on verse 2, we'll just have a look at the next 2 bars, okay? So your next bar is G minor, and then we get something classic Jameson here, okay? So he plays G, and then he plays an A, and then he plays F, F sharp. Okay, so we're over a G minor here, so he's playing G, which is the root, then he's playing A, which is the second, which gives you a bit of tension. You know, it wants to resolve up to the 3rd or down to the root. Then he plays the minor 7, and then he plays the major 7, or as a chromatic note going up, because then we get into a G minor major 7. So the line is, okay, and then we get, okay, which is really interesting chord. Okay, we get a G minor with a major 7 on top. Now Jameson approaches this really, really cool and really unusually, okay? And he builds loads of tension in this. So what he does this dotted quaver thing he likes to do again. So he plays this G over this, and then he dives to an F natural, which is the minor 7, and then he plays the major 7. So another thing this is this like sort of like double entendre, if you like, where he's playing sort of a chromatic passing note, but he's also using it to build tension and highlight something. So, you know, obviously the thing that makes that chord really crunchy, this G minor major 7, is that major 7. So he's almost like diving to it to really highlight it. Okay, that F sharp really highlights it, really screams like this is like a really crunchy, unusual chord, but it also serves as chromaticism to lead us into this G minor 7 where it goes again. Now in this G minor 7, he's more like stable. He's quite like concrete the way he approaches it. So you get this G minor, and then he just plays like almost an arpeggio over it. So then he plays B flat, then he plays, which is our minor 3rd, like we talked about, G, B flat, D. Okay, so he plays this B flat, and then he plays C, which you talked about, which is our like sus4, which gives us a bit of tension, and then he plays the 5th, D, which is really interesting. Okay, so super slowly you get, okay, which is really cool. Then we go into this C9. Okay, so this is a chord with a dominant function C9, so we get this. Okay, now he does something really interesting here. So we talked about dominant functions like 5-to-1. So if we work out what 5-to-1 is, like what is C9 taking us to as functional harmony would have it? Like, what is C9 trying to resolve to? So C9 is trying to resolve to F. Okay, this is, okay, that's the feeling it has. So it's got everything it wants to resolve to F. This E wants to come up to F. Okay, this G wants to come up to A, or the B flat down to A, B flat up to C. So everything in it wants to pull you to F. So Jameson does something really interesting over this, and I'm going to try and voice it just with one hand. Let me see if I can do that. No, I can't do that. Okay, so over this, Jameson does something really interesting. He sort of nods at the chord that it's going to resolve to. So he does this really cool thing that he always does, again with the dotted quaver thing. So he plays a C, then he plays a D quickly, then he plays a semi-quaver run of C, D, F, D. So he gets... So that sounds like a G minor because I haven't got enough fingers. Okay, there we go, that's better. So he gets C, and then we get a D, then... Which is dead cool, okay, because that almost like your ear knows it wants to go after that. Then... Okay, which is really cool, and then after that he goes to the F, where he keeps it quite sort of normal again, I don't want to say, but quite stable. He plays things like the sus4 in it to create tension, but he keeps it quite stable on a whole again, and then he goes to this C augmented. But if we go down a bit, so if I just exit out of this editing mode, and if we scroll down a bit and have a look, so I kind of want to look at the second verse, so I want to look at here, so, oh, that's me swiping, technology. So if we look at the second verse here and just compare it to the first verse, remember we spoke about this F sharp diminished chord, this F sharp, A, C, E flat, like quite a contentious chord because it's functional harmony. We all know it's trying to get to the G minor, but some people say, okay, functionally I'd say it's an F sharp fully diminished, functionally I'd say it's a D7 flat 9. We know it's borrowed from G harmonic minor. But Jameson does something really interesting. So originally, when we played this chord, Jameson played an upside down like D arpeggio, so saying like, hey, I think it's a D7 flat 9. Now in the second verse, he does something really interesting, okay? In the second verse, if you see here, he sort of dispels what we were just talking about, and he plays F sharp, F sharp, A, F sharp, okay? So we get this chord, F sharp, A, C, E flat, and he plays... Okay, so if we go from the F6, so we just put an F over that F6, then he plays, and then we get into that G minor 7 this time. Okay, now, a couple of things you could think about. You could think he still thinks that's a D7 flat 9. Okay, so you could think he still thinks that that is this chord, and he's just approached it from the third, and he's playing 3, 3, 5, 3. So if you think we got 1, D, 3, F sharp, major third, 5th A, then we get 7, C natural, then we get flat 9, E flat. Okay, so he could be thinking